My name is Scott Williams. I'm not only a member here at Bethel, but also the Research and Education Coordinator at the Wisconsin Energy Institute, which is based at UW-Madison. Here today with co-presenter Kathy Kuntz, who is the Director of the Office of Energy and Climate Change at Dane County, to really bring attention to the Inflation Reduction Act. Just by its name, you don't realize, may not realize that it's really the biggest energy and climate federal legislation that we've ever had. And a lot of what's involved in it, it really depends on all of us taking action to take advantage of those incentives. So my goal for my part of the presentation is to kind of give you the context of how the IRA came about, and then turn it over to Kathy to give a little bit more detail about what's in the program, what incentives can you take advantage of, both as a household and then things that we as a church or community groups or schools or anything can take advantage of. So that's why I really put the you in the presentation, because there's lots of things that you can take away from this. But this is my sort of alternative title to this presentation. Hopefully many of you get this reference, but instead of war is over, I'm thinking climate pollution is over if you want it. And the idea is that we have really all the tools and solutions to get us on the path to reducing and eventually eliminating greenhouse gas emissions that are leading to climate change. So just a little bit about me. At UW-Madison, I lead energy education efforts, whether that's through certificate programs for graduate and undergraduate students. I also lead public outreach events. We have a bi-weekly seminar series and a monthly forum discussion, and other energy events both for K-12 and for college students, where they can really learn the nuts and bolts of energy, both from a technical perspective and a policy and economics and environmental perspective. If you are interested in any things that we do, you can go to energy.wisc.edu. So I like to start a lot of my talks with this quote from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a group of scientists that do an assessment every few years to kind of understand what's the state of climate change. And I like this headline because it really gets at where we are right now. So the evidence is clear. We know climate change is happening. We know what's causing it. The time for action is now. We can see temperature rising over the last several decades. So we really need to act now in order to reduce emissions and adapt to climate change. But the good news is we can have emissions by 2030. We can cut them in half because we have the solutions available to do that. The reason we can do that really is this huge price drop in the price of clean energy technologies like solar and wind especially. You can see from 2009 to 2023, we've dropped over 90% of the cost of solar. And similar with wind, maybe less of a huge price drop, but still. Wind and solar now are the most affordable sources of new energy generation, electricity generation. You can see on the right hand, some of the other ones, the more conventional ones, are actually increasing in price over time. So this is really making the transition to clean energy affordable. Another example with electric vehicles, battery prices, again, fallen over 90% in over a decade. So really this is making clean energy and clean energy solutions affordable in a way that they might not have been a decade ago. One of the problems, though, is that these clean energy solutions, while they save money over time, they really have a lot of upfront costs. So this is an example graph from the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, just comparing different types of energy generation and looking at kind of the lifetime costs of different technologies. And on the left, we have kind of solar and wind in different areas. And this blue shows here that most of the cost is really in the capital cost, that upfront, what it costs to build it and install it. But once it's built, it's generating electricity without any fuel. And so there's very little other costs that are involved in building that. On the other hand, on the right, you see natural gas, a couple different types of natural gas power plants. And they cost a lot less to build initially, but then most of the lifetime costs come from the fuel costs or other operations and maintenance costs. So that might seem cheaper up front, but really you're paying more over time. Same thing with electric vehicles. There might be an upfront cost, but you're saving fuel over time. So eventually in a few years, you'll get that kind of crossover. This is an example between a Tesla and a Camry of savings over time. Unfortunately, there's still the problem of how do you get that money up front. And there's financing issues or just cash flow issues that everyone runs into. So the solution that the Inflation Reduction Act really is to subsidize clean energy. So most of what the IRA provides are tax credits or other subsidies to help defray that upfront cost. And a lot of the lessons that went into the IRA came from kind of past policy failures from previous federal policy. So before we get into the IRA, I just wanted to quickly show the history of the last decade and a half or so. Many of you might remember in 2009, 2010, there was what's called a cap and trade, where you set a cap on emissions, and then companies can trade those emissions. That was also called the Waxman-Markey bill that was passed in the House, sponsored by those representatives. But it didn't have enough votes in the Senate to pass, and so eventually it just died, and the Congress moved on. A few years later, President Obama, through the EPA, instituted this Clean Power Plan, which is really requiring utilities across their portfolio to reduce emissions. And this got challenged in courts. Eventually, the Supreme Court blocked its implementation. They couldn't do anything really to move it forward. And then we all know what happened in 2016 with the election. So that Clean Power Plan went away, got replaced by something else. It was much weaker. That never actually got implemented either. And there was a court decision in 2022 that actually effectively killed Obama's Clean Power Plan, even though it wasn't being implemented at all, even if it was 2 administrations ago. So that also limited some things that the EPA can do in terms of regulating emissions from power plants. I'm not going to get into that much today unless you have questions about that. But in any event, just sort of restricting emissions or taxing or setting limits, what I would say more like sticks, like punishing pollution, has run into these problems. And the state of Washington also tried a carbon tax, and that effectively, that was voted down through a referendum, actually a couple times. And part of it actually came from opposition on the left, where they felt like a carbon tax really wasn't helping in terms of reaching social justice goals. Eventually, I think people got on to the fact that maybe taking a mostly stick approach isn't the best way forward on climate. So this new framework that I think especially came through from the state of Washington and kind of spread across the US is to combine 3 different ideas. One is standards, so setting a standard like 100% clean energy by 2050 or other kind of standard like that. So you have a very specific goal of where you need to be in clean energy. Then there's investment, which is let's actually provide companies and individuals money so that they can make that clean energy transition, so they're not paying so much up front to do that, and then investing in manufacturing and or installation that we can create good jobs as well. And then the final piece is really justice, so investing in the places that have been historically disadvantaged to help make sure that they're not left behind in the clean energy transition. So Governor Jay Inslee, who was the governor of Washington, actually still is, I think, he ran for president in 2020. He kind of termed himself as the climate president. When he dropped out, a lot of his policy platform was adopted by the Democrats. So they had this framework going in once President Biden was elected. Another theme that emerged during this time is really the idea of electrifying everything. And this is kind of encompassed by this book, Electrify, which I definitely recommend. The idea being that wind and solar are now getting really, really cheap. We can build a lot of it and we'll have cheap electricity. And other solutions like electric vehicles, air source heat pumps or geothermal heat pumps that use electricity instead of fossil fuels, those are becoming more efficient and more cost effective. And so we can transition our economy to electric solutions to get rid of fossil fuel emissions. And by doing so, we'll save energy, we'll save money in the long term, and we'll reduce emissions. And so the ideas kind of behind electrifying everything really go into the nuts and bolts of the incentives for the Inflation Reduction Act. The path to getting there, though, was a little bumpy. Many of you might remember in 2021 we had a 50-50 Senate, so effectively Vice President Harris was the tie-breaking vote. So that meant you had to get the most conservative Democrat on board if you wanted to do anything on climate legislation. And in this case, that meant Joe Manchin. You might remember President Biden had this idea called Build Back Better, which is this really huge investment in all parts of the economy, especially as we're getting out of the pandemic. And this chart up here kind of represents that, different spending, whether that's child tax credits or healthcare spending or childcare. And there's a lot of kind of social spending. Some of it was also in infrastructure, like what passed in the bipartisan infrastructure law. But through many, over a year at least, of negotiation with Joe Manchin, he effectively chipped away at that over time and said, no, I'm not going to support anything many times, and came back to the negotiating table. So effectively what was left really was what got passed through the Inflation Reduction Act. That was in August 2022. And in terms of, for climate and energy folks, the good news is that a lot of what was kept in place that he agreed to really was in the original piece of the Build Back Better. There just were a few things that were cut back in terms of clean energy standards, so having a national clean energy standard. That unfortunately got cut. Part of the issue too is that because of the way that the Senate rules require 60 votes to break a filibuster, the only way you can get things passed through a majority in that case is through budget reconciliation. And that's kind of a once a year or so bill that you can pass. And really that only affects things that are that affect the budget. So the Inflation Reduction Act had to be written in a way that all of the programs affected the budget in some way. And so after Joe Manchin said no a couple times, they renamed it the Inflation Reduction Act to get him on board because he was concerned about all the spending. And really, in exchange for the support, he asked for a few things like permitting reform and then fast-tracking a couple of fossil fuel projects, which that's also being tied up a little bit too. So in effect, we went from a stick approach to really a carrot approach in terms of giving out lots and lots of incentives and subsidies to all parts of the economy to help us transition to renewable energy and be more efficient. Hopefully many of you get the reference there as well. So what's in the Inflation Reduction Act? This is a very busy slide. I'm going to take a little bit of time to go through. The big piece that you can see in terms of what the estimated impact on the budget is these clean electricity tax credits. So a lot of solar and wind have already had these tax credits for many years, and you either get like a 30% investment tax credit where 30% of the cost you get a rebate on your taxes the next year, or it's a production tax credit where for every kilowatt hour that you generate you get 2 cents in tax credits. So that got extended for 10 years for solar and wind, and it also got extended to many other clean energy technologies. There's other air pollution, other kind of hazardous materials, transportation infrastructure, a lot of work through the EPA to reduce greenhouse gases and other pollutants. There's individual clean energy incentives, so things like energy efficiency rebates that you might get for your home or for your business. There are tax credits that are available basically to anyone, and then there are specific rebates for low-income residents. There are also clean manufacturing tax credits, so thinking about the economy that we want to build that's 100% clean energy, there's a lot that needs to be built in the US in order to make sure we have the supply chain to do that, and also kind of build the new technologies that are just emerging like hydrogen or carbon capture and storage that can help us really transition the last few percent of our economy over to 100% clean energy. There's also clean fuel and vehicle tax credits. Those are for things like electric vehicle rebates or funding for sustainable aviation fuel. So instead of using it from petroleum, getting it from biological sources, which is a lot of what we're working on at the Wisconsin Energy Institute. There's also tax credits for hydrogen production, which can be used for industry, for transportation. It's a lot more flexible, but also more difficult to produce, and we don't have that industry yet kind of built up in the US, so A lot of money is going into that. There's also a big chunk going into things like conservation and rural development, so things like climate smart agriculture, helping adaptation to climate change, so making sure communities are more resilient and have the infrastructure they need to withstand the extreme impacts of climate change. There's other building efficiency rebates, there's loan guarantees for really big projects. There's way more. There's several pages of all these different programs that you can go read through. But some other important stipulations of this. A lot of these tax credits, they have kind of either bonuses or there's a sliding scale of how much tax credit you get if you're paying the prevailing wage or have other labor standards, if you're using domestic content or components that are from kind of friendly countries. There's also a bonus for doing these projects in energy communities. So these are communities that have kind of been part of the traditional fossil fuel industry. So lots of places down south in Texas and Louisiana, but other places that might have had a coal plant in the community and that's closing. And so now if you invest with a solar or wind project in these communities, then you can get extra tax credits to do that. There's also very specific carve-outs, grants, rebates, and loans for low-income and disadvantaged communities. That again goes back to that concept of the justice, and the Biden administration has this concept of Justice 40, where 40% of the benefits should go to historically disadvantaged communities. The other thing that's really exciting for a place like Bethel is since nonprofits and governments don't pay taxes, they haven't been able to take advantage of tax credits in previous legislation. So what the IRA does is provide a really direct payment for governments and nonprofits. So you can get the same benefits of a tax credit, but now you just get a check and you can do whatever you want with it. So that's something over the next 10 years that I really hope Bethel will look into, what's available and see, what we can do to cover the cost of upgrading to a clean energy system. There's also a methane emissions fee, just putting a tax on oil and gas to make sure they're not venting, releasing methane, which is much more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. There's money for states to do their own greenhouse gas reduction planning, and the state office of, is it sustainability? I can't remember the acronym. Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy, yes. Maria Redman is leading that, and so she's leading the planning for that as well, so you can get involved in that process. The other great thing about the IRA is it's a 10-year timeline, so that provides certainty for industry to make their investments because they're thinking long-term, and this is all this is capital equipment that usually has a lifetime of 20 years or more, so really having that certainty over time can help make those investment decisions. And we can see already where those investments are. The White House puts out this map of showing where all the solar and wind and battery storage facilities are being put into place, as well as other manufacturing facilities for clean energy. This also includes things like semiconductors, which is from like the CHIPS and Science Act. But this gives you, the good news about we're already seeing results from these bills leading to investments, private investment all across the United States. And here's one example in terms of manufacturing investments. These are this is more about pledges, I think, but these are actual investment dollars. And you can see the IRA is probably the biggest effect that it's had is on batteries and EVs. There's a lot more manufacturing capacity going into place right now. That's the big blue bars on the right-hand side there. So you can see it's already having an effect. And this graph comes from the solar industry in the US, and they're projecting the lighter blue is kind of pre-IRA, and then their projections for the effect that the IRA will have in terms of building solar across the US over time. So that's kind of understanding what's in the IRA, what industries are affected, and ultimately the goal is to reduce emissions, right? So there's a number of groups that have done different modeling, economic modeling, to see what's the effect of this policy. And most of them are around 40% reduction for their estimates of assuming that we all take advantage of all these incentives that are available. But there's a range, there's uncertainty with that, but the kind of headline target is 40%. Unfortunately, that doesn't get us to what our stated goal is at the Paris Agreement, which is about 50% of the levels below 2005. So we do need additional work to reach those goals. And there are some other barriers that might slow the transition that the IRA doesn't necessarily address. One is just because we're investing so much in wind and solar and other things, we're going to have to build a lot. And I don't think we as a country have had that experience, that recent experience in really kind of building out tons and tons of infrastructure. And there's lots of places where that can get kind of mucked up. One example is the interconnection queue. So this is the Midwest grid called MISO. And these are all the projects that are in their queue that have said, hey, we'd like to connect to the grid. And for all of these, MISO has to go through a study to see, hey, can the grid handle this particular power plant at this point? And you can see there's dozens, close to 100 or more of these potential power plants that could be built. And so this is one thing that this goes to sort of the institutional capacity. We need more people working on these so that we can kind of fast track some of these construction projects. Another sort of a barrier or disadvantage of the IRA is it has very few disincentives for fossil fuels. Again, I think this was intentional just because of the experience from previous climate policy that failed. So ultimately, we need to find some way of creating disincentives for fossil fuels. And a lot of it relies on individual actions. And Kathy, who has been working for a few decades on getting people to make sustainable decisions, will tell you behavior change is very hard, both from just a psychological level, but then also a cash flow level. A lot of these, again, are upfront investments. And even with the incentives, there's still a lot of upfront money that has to be put out there. The good news, though, is that for the tax credit portion of the IRA, there's no cap on how much can be spent. And so if things are actually going better than expected, we could be spending a lot more, and we could be getting more reductions over time. So the initial Congressional Budget Office estimated the budgetary impact of $391 billion, but other groups have looked in and said, actually, we think folks are going to take more advantage of those tax credits. So it could go up to $1.2 trillion in federal money that's supporting this, and that will spur over $3 trillion in private investment.
So,
question?
So Goldman Sachs did an analysis, or?
Exactly. Yeah. There's lots of these private companies and consulting firms that they do these economic analyses so that they can recommend, like, hey, to companies that do business with them, here's what we think you should invest in. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, the debate over the budget and the budget ceilings, and I guess the congressional over the appropriations debate revolves around caps on some of these uncapped, potentially uncapped over the years. Mm-hmm. How is that working out? What is this? I don't know whether this gets you off the topic at the moment. I'll wait till afterward if you want. But how is this running into the buzzsaw of budget reduction, debt ceilings, and so forth?
Yeah. So I'll just repeat in case folks didn't hear. Obviously the government has to stay funded, and there's been bills that have been passed in budget negotiations in Congress recently. I am not familiar with what, if anything, is on the chopping block in terms of, Kathy, do you know that?
Yeah, so the tax credits, nobody has seriously proposed cutting the tax credits. What political people tell me is there is no example they can come up with in history where Congress set up a tax credit and then ended it early. Because inevitably a congressperson's going to have a constituent who says, hey, I was planning to use that tax credit, kind of thing. The tax credits seem like the safest piece of this work, is sort of what the experts say.
Yeah. Democrats love them because they get to favor their favorite industries, and Republicans love them because Republicans love tax credits. So it's a win-win situation. Yeah.
Well, something that popped into my mind when you were have the first couple of slides up there. Is there any provision, is anybody thinking about provisions for helping the people in energy producing states, that is coal and gas? Manchin, of course, represents a major coal producing place, and his constituents are producing a lot of energy through coal.
Right.
And I can understand why they would be a little reluctant to support this kind of thing. So I'm wondering, is there any? Do you know of any program to
bring them on board?
Yeah, to do something for these.
Yeah, so I mentioned the energy communities. That's where that really comes in. So there's no restriction. Besides the methane fee, there's really no restrictions on coal. So that's sort of kind of a downside, is that there's nothing kind of pushing that transition away. But you get bonus tax credit if you build a solar or wind facility or some other clean energy facility in a state that has been traditionally a coal state, or I guess a census tract that's traditionally a coal or oil or fossil, any other sort of traditional fossil fuel community. You can get additional tax credits in order to cite that in that, and really kind of help transition folks over to the newer, cleaner technology. So maybe I'll just skip ahead to really just say, as we mentioned, there's no tax on the on the tax credit, so there's no cap on the tax credit. So really, my hope is that you make a plan both for your household and then for the groups that you're involved in, to make a plan for how you're going to manage this transition. It's going to take several years. We can't do it all right away. But if we have the right kind of planning, and just things like next time I replace an appliance, it's going to be all electric, can really make a big difference. And hopefully we can make clean energy the default option. And again, get to this idea of climate pollution really being over. And for the folks who are closer to my age, really that the IRA reflects kind of the last best chance to really make a big dent in climate pollution. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kathy to give a little bit more detail about the incentives that are available.
So, as Scott said, I'm Kathy Kuntz. I'm with the Dane County Office of Energy and Climate Change. And we spend a lot of time talking to folks about how they can take advantage of the IRA. I've got some handouts there in the back if you didn't notice on the way in. So, County Executive Joe Parisi created our office to lead emission reductions both inside county operations and county-wide. And we're doing both of those things. Part of the executive's perspective is if we're going to tell folks in Dane County what to do, we better make sure our own house is in order first. So we've been working really hard to lead by example. You might know that earlier this year we achieved this milestone that 100% of all electric operations in county government are now renewable offset. Wow. So we are the first county in Wisconsin, the fourth county as far as we can tell in the nation to be 100% clean electricity. And to Scott's point he talked about electrify everything. Part of why we are moving in that direction is because we can make electricity clean. We can't make natural gas, well, a little bit we can. I'll talk about that in a second. But mostly coal we can't make clean unless we can figure out sequestration, which no one's figured out, kind of thing. But electricity, we can make it clean so we can run everything on electricity. The other thing we've done in the county that's really groundbreaking is around natural gas. So we have a county landfill. You eat a banana, you throw the peeling away, it goes to the landfill. As it rots, it emits methane. That's just how decomposition works. At our landfill, we capture all of that methane with an elaborate system of pipes, and we put it through that facility where it is cleaned and compressed into pipeline quality natural gas. We use a small portion of it to fuel some of our vehicles. Some of those amazing county plows you saw out in the last week, about half of them run on renewable natural gas. A county plow gets approximately 3 to 5 miles per gallon, whether it runs on diesel or natural gas, because, you know, it's big and it's pushing snow the whole time it's running. The renewable natural gas we make costs us about $1.50 a gallon compared to $4, $5, $6 for diesel. So saving money on all of these things, but also really leading by example. That's one of the ways we try to make change happen, okay? Show you how it can be done. Another way we make change happen is to celebrate the other folks who are making change happen. So we have a Climate Champions program where we've recognized more than 150 local entities for their leadership, whether it's on energy efficient buildings or water conservation or sustainable land practices, lots of different ways, because we know that if we provide positive reinforcement, we can get more done. Okay, so Scott said I'm sort of into behavior change. There's sort of three things. You lead by example, you provide positive reinforcement, and you make it easy for people to change. Well, that's where our obsession with the Inflation Reduction Act comes in, because this, you know, it's this big federal thing, and I need to make it easy enough for all of you to take advantage of it 8 or 9 times in the next decade. That's our obsession. So, it is totally the time for clean energy. There was money for climate in the infrastructure law that passed in 21, but the Inflation Reduction Act is so much more powerful. And it's powerful because it's not traditional. So these tax credits, you know, the infrastructure law is a very traditional federal law. That's where the money comes to do the electrical vehicle charging infrastructure along the interstates. And how that works is the federal government decides what the allocation is for each state. They notify the states have to write a plan to get their allocation, the feds have to approve the plan, the states have to implement the plan. It takes years, okay? Ohio just installed the first charger in the country funded under that 2021 law. That's how long that takes. Tax credits. You do a project, you claim the credit. No middle people. And as Scott said, you know, the more projects we do, the more money we can get out there. So our obsession is really, let's do this. And we've never had better clean energy technology cost prices to do these things. So lots of really good opportunities there. The last thing I'll say is when the feds developed these credits, they really enabled us to stack things. So you can take a focus on energy credit and the federal credit, and you don't get penalized for using 2 credits. You know, in the past, sometimes it took off the total and then you felt like you got less. No, as long as you're not getting more than the total, they're good with you stacking things. So it's way more pro let's get it done than it's ever been. To make this all make sense to folks, we created a whole new section of our website under federal funding where we've got plain language discussions of what is going on, but then we've got links to all of the federal documents too. Because we know, particularly when you deal with like businesses or nonprofits, it's good to have a common sense language that you understand, but then there's a lawyer or a CPA or someone who wants to read IRS documents, and we'll link you to them so they can have the fun of reading all 850 pages of. So I'm going to talk through 3 big opportunities for individuals, and then we'll talk about a little bit about businesses and nonprofits before we're done. And the first one I want to start with is electric vehicles, because this is probably the opportunity under the Inflation Reduction Act that applies to the most people, because renters can take advantage of this. So under the IRA, there's a $7,500 credit for a new electric vehicle that meets certain standards in terms of where the battery is produced, and that list of what qualifies changes over time. two things for you to know about that. If you lease a vehicle, when you lease a vehicle, what happens from the IRS's perspective is the dealership buys a vehicle and leases it to you. So then the dealership, the business tax credits on EVs are much simpler. There's no criteria about batteries. Everything that's electric gets $7,500. So you can get the full credit by leasing if the vehicle you want doesn't qualify for the credit purchasing. There's like a lot of trickiness in this. That's why we want to make it simpler. The other thing is starting this year, the IRS is working with dealerships so that you can get that $7,500 off the purchase price when you buy. It's an instant rebate. So instead of having to come up with all the money for the car and then wait until you file your taxes to get that $7,500 back, you can get it right there at the dealership. And that program is just starting to roll out. There's also up to $4,000 for a used EV. So I'm a huge fan of used EVs. I think if you are a 2 or more car household and you are thinking about an EV, a used EV is a good place to start, because you don't have to have all the worries about, oh, but what about that once a year when we want to take a really big trip or something? And it lets you figure out some of the advantages of having an EV. So a $4,000 credit there. The vehicle can't cost more than $25,000, and you have to buy it from a dealership, because their aim is that every vehicle only get one credit, so they're trying to track that in a complex way.
Isn't there a way that you can, if you want to sell, you can sort of go through a dealership?
You could, yes, you could. I'm sure there is. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yes, there probably is a way to get a dealership to help you make that happen if two individuals wanted to sell. So all of the major manufacturers have acknowledged that EVs are the future. The benefits of driving an EV are pretty numerous. That, full disclosure, that's my EV in my house up there in that picture. So we do 95, maybe 98% of our charging at home in a regular 120 volt outlet in the garage. Yeah, it's slow, but like, it's totally fine. Most of us drive less than 40 miles a day, okay? Overnight, you can charge more than 40 miles, even within 120 volt. It's all fine. An EV has more like 100 moving parts versus the thousands in your gas car, so there's just fundamentally a lot less maintenance involved here. It's also clean and quiet. When I talk to EV owners, like, that's the thing they talk about, that you don't have an engine rumbling kind of thing. If you can I can turn on my EV in the garage and preheat it before I go out there on a cold day, and there's no concerns about carbon monoxide because it doesn't have exhaust. You know, there become like all these kind of, oh, well, that's like a much better, and EVs have amazing torque. I mean, when you step on the pedal, the vehicle goes. It's got to go through this whole internal combustion engine thing to go. Like, off the line, EVs are very fast.
And like in Wisconsin, the temperature?
So cold weather affects both gas vehicles and EVs. It depends on how you run your EV, you know. So some folks really like the heat blowing in their vehicle all the time when they're driving. That's gonna affect your EV range, because an electric vehicle doesn't generate heat that it can just throw at you the way a gas car does. My EV has heated seats and a heated steering wheel, and I'm wearing a coat in the winter because I grew up in the Midwest. I'm not like in my car in shorts and a t-shirt. I mean, I don't need it 75 in the cabin. So I don't see as much of an impact as some people see, but that's a thing. Yes, it's a real thing. So this map is of new vehicle sales across the country. I just point out that Dane County there is a pretty bright orange in Wisconsin. I mean, we know that we're seeing more EVs here in Dane County than across the state. And that number, so we're pretty on par with this 8.5% statewide thing. The other thing, if you are curious about all of this and you're like, but I don't think there are any chargers in our community, I don't know where that is. PlugShare is my favorite EV app. PlugShare is like the Yelp of charging. You know how Yelp tells you which restaurant is a good restaurant in a community? PlugShare is all user reviews about whether that charger works, any tricks about the parking there. Like, it's fantastic. We use it all the time. So that's the EV piece.
Headline this morning about EV vehicles lined up for charging.
Yep.
And hopefully that's a short-term problem, but what do you interpret to be the sort of expansion timeline for really, really convenient charging?
Yeah, so the EV charging, we are in a little bit of a chicken and egg thing right now. There's all of this new federal money coming to fix fast charging that folks need. I think where we have a gap locally in EV charging is charging for people who live in apartment buildings, who maybe live in older apartment buildings where there isn't charging. And I can tell you, like, Dane County is talking to local cities and villages across the county about how we figure out how to fix that kind of thing. But most people, what the utilities will tell you is 80 to 90% of all charging happens at home. Like, it is the case that we need a better network. The interesting thing is when chargers don't work, it's almost always because their Wi-Fi went down. So it's like more a broadband issue than it is it's an electronic piece of equipment, and if it loses its connection, someone has to reset it. And that's like the piece that we're trying to figure out. How do we keep them connected? Okay, so that was the EVs piece. Now I'm going to shift to tax credits, and we'll first really talk about energy efficiency and then solar and geothermal. But overall, and this chart is on one of those handouts, under the IRA, there are more and better tax credits for homeowners to do clean energy improvements than ever before. On renewables, it's a 30% credit no matter how big your project is, and you can roll that tax credit into future years if you can't take full advantage of it. So it's like super great tax credit. On the efficiency side, there's a $1,200 annual cap. Again, these are in place for 10 years. So you could do an audit this year, replacing your furnace next year. You could do this serial kind of thing and get tax credits over many years. There is in addition to the maximum, there's a $2,000 special tax credit for heat pumps, and we'll talk about heat pumps in a minute. So how all of this works, of course, is you do the work and then you file the paperwork with your taxes to get the credit back on your taxes. So this is not ideal for folks who do not have the income up front. We'll talk about another option in a minute, but it is a way to do it for folks who can afford it. And I just threw in here a couple of tax scenarios to give you, so Jane does her taxes and she owes $5,000. She installed a heat pump. That's going to reduce her taxes to $3,000. If she withheld $3,000, she doesn't owe anything, kind of thing. Just kind of trying to walk you through how. So a tax credit comes off the amount of taxes you owe. Alternatively, Arlo owes $5,000. He did the same thing. His withholding was $5,000, so he gets the $2,000 back. Bill only owes $1,500 in taxes. He did a heat pump for $2,000. These are not refundable tax credits, so the most he can get back is the $1,500 that was his initial tax liability. That can sometimes be a surprise for folks. So just to give you, okay, so let's talk a little bit more about energy efficiency. I always really like this picture from Energy Star because it's got that nice inset that red line around what we call the heated box. Okay, your house has a box that you want to heat and cool. And there are all kinds of features of our homes, especially older homes, that thwart our ability to keep that heat inside the heated box. And you know, a good example is when we build homes, we cut square boxes for piping and then we put round pipes through them. And if we don't air seal that properly, there's like places there for the warm air to leak into your attic and out of your house, kind of thing. In Minneapolis, 2 years ago, they passed an ordinance that every time a house is sold, it has to have an energy audit. And they did an analysis, and 2/3 of the homes sold in Minneapolis have inadequate insulation and air sealing. And they were sort of like, what? That did not surprise me at all. 2/3 of the homes in Dane County have inadequate air sealing and insulation. Trust me, because they're old. And that's just how houses are. So let's think about this a minute. Ways you can tell if your house is energy efficient or not. If you go up and down stairs in your house, does the temperature change in a dramatic way? Like you can feel? Okay, that's a sign that this heated box is not maybe doing what some windows frost up in the winter. My favorite, I actually been trying to take pictures of this lately. The snow melts off your roof a lot faster than it does off the neighbor's. Okay, if you look around your neighborhood, there's probably a house or two where you're like, man, snow goes, their roof faces the same direction as yours, but the snow is like gone instantly. That means that roof is warm. That means they're heating the roof and the outside with their utilities. Or you have the big icicles hanging, okay, that would be a sign of that. Or in our communities, your energy usage is just higher than similar homes. So how many of you knew that you could look up energy usage of your neighbors to see how you compare to them? Oh, come on guys, this is the funnest thing. Okay, so 2 examples, and this is a little bit hard to see. So the first one I did is, this is in Verona. This is in a row of condos. So these are identical units. The first one uses about 410 kilowatt hours of electricity a month, and the second one uses 145 kilowatt hours of electricity a month. There is nothing structurally different between those units. That's totally about how people are living in those units, okay? This is under average energy use cost for an address on Alliant Energy's site. And on MG&E's site, similarly, this is 2 houses that I randomly picked on Kai's. The first one uses an average of 63 therms a month in the winter. The other one uses an average of 100. So I can tell this house needs insulation and air sealing. Look, their highest therm month is almost 100 therms higher than the other house. Again, these are pretty similar homes. They're like next to each other or one between them. And the electricity follows that too. They have a higher, this is cooling. So both cooling and both air conditioning in the summer and heating in the winter, they're spending more. So you can go on there, you can type in a couple addresses around you and get a sense of, are we doing well? Are we, holy cow, not doing well?
When you go ahead.
I was just going to ask, if I live in an apartment building, can I look at my neighbors?
You can. You typically do the unit stuff. I like the way, honestly, I like the way that works on Alliance better because you can see like a bunch of them at once. But yeah, yes, you can. So all of that is my pitch that you know, the first thing you want to do relative to a lot of these energy credits that we've talked about is get an energy audit. Find out how you're doing. Certainly if you do that comparison and you're at the higher end, that's a good, okay, if you had some of those signals, get an energy audit. That's going to help you make that roadmap for how you want to make improvements to your house over the next 10 years when you've got access to these credits.
And I'm also a renter right now, but the energy audit, does it come from the
So you're going to want to work with your landlord to do it as a
That's
renter.
a whole nother story.
Yeah, we'll talk more about, like, there's some angles here that might help. The other reason you want to do an energy audit is if you are interested in a heat pump. So, you know, heat pumps are this new exciting thing we're talking about to heat and cool. A heat pump is just an air conditioner with full features, okay? All an air conditioner does is take hot air from the outside and run it through a compressor so it can bring whatever coolness it can pull out of it into your house. A heat pump just does that both directions, okay? That's the whole of what a heat pump is. A two-way air conditioner is just the simplest way to think about that. There are 4 major kinds of heat pumps. So ground source, when we put tubes into the ground to capture the more constant heat underground down 200 feet, temperature here at Bethel is like 50 degrees all the time. Using that to heat and cool your home, that kind of constant temperature, that qualifies as a renewable energy measure. So if you do ground source or geothermal, there's no limit. That's a 30% credit on the whole. Everything else is a 30% credit up to the $2,000 limit. So then there are cold climate heat pumps. You might have heard stories. We have a few people in our community who are getting rid of their gas furnaces and making their homes all electric. They're putting in a cold climate heat pump. These are new heat pumps that are going to work to colder temperatures. They almost always have to have some electrical resistance heat backup just in case for the super cold weather if the heat pump can't keep up. But the more efficient your house is, the more likely a heat pump will work, which is why that audit is so important. Then there are more folks who are doing dual fuel. So they're replacing their central air conditioner with a heat pump that cools much more efficiently than the air conditioner, and it provides cost-effective heat in the shoulder months. And then they just use their gas or propane furnace for the coldest months. And you know, if you have a gas furnace that in the past, our gas furnaces ran kind of constantly for those cold months. If now it's only running 10 days a year, it might last quite a bit longer. Way in the back.
Question, I know the geothermal is hard to do in the city, but a lot of people have cottages. Do the tax credits count if you did a second home?
Do you want to repeat that in case people...
Yeah, so the question was about your primary residence versus your second home and whether, you know, I feel like it's different for different pieces. Let's look at the sheet at the end. I don't want to say something for sure, but, and the other thing is the cost effectiveness is much better at your cottage because you're probably heating with propane, which is really expensive and erratically priced. Oh, and then there are these ductless mini splits. So that's like if you've added a room above the garage or something and your HVAC system really isn't designed to heat and cool that. It's like a heat pump that works in those small places that need an extra boost. So lots of heat pump options, and what you do is going to depend on what you're wanting to accomplish here. We're seeing a lot of dual fuel things. Focus has a new consumer guide, and we have a list on our website of local HVAC contractors who sell and install heat pumps in Dane County. Because people had trouble finding a contractor, and so we've now worked with contractors to identify a list of folks there. Okay, so that's the heat pump. So really, I've been talking about the tax credits, which work again if you have the money up front. There is also, though, as Scott mentioned, going to be money for 2 new, what we're calling now, home energy rebate programs. And these programs are really oriented to help lower income households, to help renters. So one program is going to provide incentives for efficiency, and one is going to provide incentives for electrification, including induction stoves and electric dryers and all of these different pieces. These programs are going to run through Focus on Energy, our statewide energy efficiency program. And they're going to roll out probably this summer. So this is another case where, you know, the feds have to set the rules and the states have to figure out how they're going to follow the rules. And so that's a little bit still coming. Focus does have information now on their website, and they're doing some input sessions to get input into how these work. We're running long, so I'm going to go faster now. Solar. Bottom line, there's more solar already in Dane County than anywhere else in the state, and an advantage of that means we have a robust solar installer network. There's a group buy that happens every year. If you're interested in solar, Madison is like a nice, friendly place to start to assess your opportunities. The way solar works, you put solar on your roof, and when your house is using electricity and the sun is shining, that solar electricity is going to power your house. If there is more electricity than your house needs, it will go through the meter to the grid. If it's less than your house needs, more electricity will come back through the meter to your house. It's kind of the basics of this. Scott talked about costs of solar coming down. This is looking at this more from a homeowner perspective. So we installed the solar at our house in 2008, and I can tell you our module cost was about $350, and people told me that it was amazing that I got that great deal on solar modules. Solar modules are now about 50 cents a watt. My husband doesn't like that graph. Just a quick, like how this might work. So a 7 kW array, my estimate costs about $24,000 now. With the tax credit and the focus on energy rebate, you're down to what is almost a 10-year payback there. Energy efficiency is still going to have a faster payback than renewables. Okay, so Maria has a $5,000 tax liability. She paid $5,500 through her payroll tax. She did a $9,000 solar array, so she's going to owe no taxes this year. She's going to get $5,500 back, everything she paid in, but she's also going to have credits that roll over to next year. Because remember, the renewable energy credits roll over. The energy efficiency credits don't roll over, but the renewable energy credits roll forward. All of that was for us as individuals, but there's also kind of parallel things for businesses and now nonprofits. There are renewable energy credits for solar, geothermal, battery storage. There are energy efficiency deductions. There's the clean fuel piece of this. I want to just emphasize this. So initially, we called this direct pay. Now the IRS is calling it elective pay, this thing where nonprofits can get these credits. So essentially, for the first time, this isn't a grant. This is we do a project, and then we do some paperwork with the IRS, and they send us a check for the 30% of what we did. And it's maybe best to show this to you this way. So the Village of McFarland, before the pandemic, started building a public safety center to house their police and fire departments. They committed to that being a net zero energy facility. During the pandemic, construction costs went up, and they grappled with, are we still going to do this net zero? And they decided they were. And then the Inflation Reduction Act happened. And then their building finished, and their building finished after the IRA, so it qualifies for this credit. So they spent about $3.3 million on solar and geothermal, and they're going to get about $1 million back for that project. And for a local government, I mean, they're going to get, literally, they're going to file, this is what we did this much solar, it cost this, we did this much geothermal, it cost this, and the IRS is going to send them a check for $1 million. This is not a grant application where you have like 99 forms and 88 quarters of reporting. It's a check from the IRS, and it's unrestricted funds back to the village at that point. So they could pay down their debt on the building, but they could also do something else that's important to them with that money because it's their money. So as these stories start to happen, I think we're going to see a lot more momentum because that's pretty exciting to get that kind of money back for local governments. And then I'll just close with, so I talked about the stuff on our website, but there's also Rewiring America website, the Focus on Energy, the Mattis Sun. We have links to all of this, all kinds of good resources. So I'll stop there because we're over time. And I'm fine answering questions. I just wanted to be respectful that, yeah.
I'm curious, with this boom of solar panels, what happens in 20, 25 years when they've outlived their life?
Yeah, so we're in the, I would say, so the question was about solar panels at the end of their life. So a solar panel has a warranty for 25 years. In most industries, that means that it's going to be productive for closer to 50. But eventually they're going to wear out, and there are recycling things already happening. I think over time we're going to see more recycling because we can get minerals out of them that we can use, in the same way that our smartphones now are recycled to pull those precious minerals back out for the next smartphone. We're going to see more of that happening in the solar panel arena.
I would say the same thing for electric vehicle batteries. And, the lead acid batteries now, they have probably the highest recycling rate of any product. And so initially electric vehicle batteries were harder to kind of disassemble and get at the minerals, but there's technologies coming about that are able to capture those minerals and recycle them into new materials.
Yeah, yeah.
And the wind towers?
So the thing I think we are struggling, although some people are working hard on figuring this out, the wind turbine blades are,
they're a composite material.
They're a composite, and so I think there is figuring out, okay, composites are less easy to take apart. It's like you blended it all together now. How do you get the strawberries back out when you've put it all in the food processor? It's more that sort of...
I think you will see technologies emerge to deal with it. I've actually also seen, there's a company that will take slices of a wind turbine blade and make park benches or other kind of garden planters and things like that. But otherwise, you can shred them and they could be used for insulating material, or I think there's going to be a lot of creative solutions that come about.
The story of solar here at Bethel is long and complicated, but we considered it for a long time. We're on the verge of doing it, and one of the great obstacles is a huge connection charge downtown. And the zone, essentially from Broome Street back to Baldwin, whatever, it's $50,000 to connect, just to connect a modest size solar unit. And it seems to me that there's also other obstacles, for example, like the height of buildings, which I'm told is also an obstacle excuse for building designers not to put solar on the roof. But it seems like this whole zone downtown is an area where positive governmental regulatory change or whatever could blanket downtown with solar.
Yeah, and I remember having conversations before about your interconnection challenges down here on the Isthmus. Those interconnection fees you can get the 30% credit on them too. I mean, the good news is you can...
A nonprofit can get those?
Yes. Under the IRA, Bethel could get the credit, including the credit for the interconnection. The bigger interconnection thing, essentially the Isthmus is a problem, Scott. I mean, and I've talked to the renewable folks, and they're like, Kathy, it's not just the rules, it's this tiny piece of land with a lot of there's an engineering piece of this that is real down here.
To what extent would battery storage help? Because then you're not maybe drawing as much power.
That could. I think as batteries become more cost effective, batteries could mitigate the need. And I mean, what the solar industry is telling us is more and more entities are installing some batteries with their solar, and that's making like everyone more familiar with how this works and more comfortable. That might help solve your problem, because it is about how small the isthmus is and like unpredictable power surges at some level.
Totally different, but also to think with the kind of work you each do, what is your opinion about that hydrogen car that they're starting in Korea?
I guess I'm not as familiar with that specific car, but do you have a...
There are two approaches to using hydrogen for vehicles: internal combustion engine or hydrogen fuel cell. The hydrogen fuel cell has the advantage that it does not generate oxides of nitrogen from the combustion process. It's a known technology, and it seems that it's moving along into commercialization, not only from the Korean supplier that you mentioned, but from a number of other sources, including for larger commercial vehicles, as well as light-duty vehicles like our cars and pickup trucks.
And the thing I would add maybe is that hydrogen becomes potentially a more important solution for heavy-duty vehicles, because we're not, it's you know, we think about range on a light-duty vehicle that we might own, but think about semi-trucks and like how there's some electrification happening there, but folks are not convinced that electrification is going to be the best way to do heavy-duty vehicles or some heavy industry that burns currently methane gas for heat. Hydrogen might be a better choice.
Steel and cement, in short.
Yeah.
The other thing too is the conversion, you know, the energy that goes into an electric vehicle, just through batteries, you get about 80% of the energy out. For an internal combustion engine, that may be 30%.
But see, when, as you say, I'm not accustomed to the EV abbreviation. I mean, who would have thought 25 years ago it was so prevalent now? So that's what I'm saying. You're working in the industry, not so much the science end, but what's your thought, simple thought?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges right now for hydrogen is how you make hydrogen, because most of the ways we make hydrogen involves like dirty something to make it, and so and then there's the is the public going to embrace hydrogen as a fuel? Are they going to be afraid of this? That's super hard to predict what is going to happen, because, you know, we're human beings, we're not particularly rational. I say that with love, okay? We're just not.
And the reason I brought it up is I have a cousin who's been in South Korea for years, so
Yeah.
I could ask him what
Yeah.
the thought is over there.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
With all this new technology and all the things coming about, what's the rate of obsolescence of some of these old things? It must be fantastic. I have no idea.
It's, you know, I think it's a really good question, because I think about things like VHS versus beta video recording, which we don't even do either of anymore. I mean, you know, it sort of doesn't matter that VHS won, but beta was, by all accounts, a better technology, but it didn't hit the market in the right way. And I think I know folks who have that view of electric vehicles right now, who think it's a much better thing to lease an electric vehicle than to buy one, because the technology keeps changing, and they're like, yeah, but 3 years from now, I'd rather be able to just walk away and walk to the next version of this. I mean, I think we're seeing technologies build upon what was there, but I do think that there are risks that and it's why the equity piece of this is so important. We have to make sure communities are not left behind. We talk about the electrification of our homes. I'm super concerned that our more affluent households will embrace heat pumps and induction stoves, and they'll get off the natural gas system. And now we've got an aging natural gas system that serves lower income households and renters. And how does that get paid for? How is that maintained? What are the risks of, that kind of, so I'm thinking honestly more about that sort of obsolescence. How do we prevent folks getting left behind on polluting technologies that, are just not good for them?
Question. So one of the big things with the EV cars is lithium and cobalt. That we don't do any of that in the U.S. That's all overseas. So how do you're becoming dependent on that?
So part of a lot of the electric vehicle. To repeat the question. So a lot of there's electric vehicle batteries use lithium and use cobalt and other minerals, and a lot of that is coming from overseas. And there's a lot of troubling things with cobalt, especially in some of the cobalt mines in Africa that use child labor. A lot of the electric vehicle companies have been switching to other batteries that don't rely on cobalt, so that's one solution, is switching the chemistry of the battery. But then there's also incentives through the IRA, I think, to build new mining sites. There's the Salton Sea in California that they're hoping to extract a lot of lithium from. So there's opportunities, and also sort of the idea of like friend shoring, so friendly countries that we might get materials from.
Yeah, we didn't talk a ton about that, but there is a lot of push here for domestic content. I talk about 30% credit on a solar, but if you do domestic content, you get another 10% credit. There's additive things that are why Scott showed how all that manufacturing is starting in the U.S. This is working. It's making companies go, oh, it's cost effective now to manufacture this in the U.S. because our customers can get this credit. We're going to have a bigger market building this plant in Tennessee versus somewhere overseas.
So just a quick last question. Is it possible to rescind this bill?
I mean, anything's possible to be rescinded, but actually, we saw with the Affordable Care Act that was passed.
I'm just saying that with the wrong administration, this could all be pulled back.
Yeah. So again, there are not examples people can come up with of where Congress has revoked tax credits. So the tax credits feel pretty secure. The money that is grants to states, I mean, what I see is the federal government is trying to get all of that money that is the grant part of this out the door and committed to local governments or someone so that it can't easily be taken back without someone saying, hey, wait, you took that away from us. But yeah, so I think some pieces potentially are still at risk of being revoked, but not probably the tax credits.
I really want to thank you, because I think one of the problems is the American public does not understand this bill. And so they don't think it's, quote, important. It sounds like a tax credit. It's really the only climate program the United States has, and there's nothing else on the table.
Right.
If this vanishes, the whole program vanishes.
Yes, it's a really important thing. The other thing I want to just say about, it feels weird that it's the Inflation Reduction Act and it's about climate, but there's actually research that every inflationary period in the U.S. since World War II was preceded by an increase in fossil fuel costs. We do not control the fossil fuel market. We are never going to control the fossil fuel market in the U.S. That's a global market. The way to not have that drive inflation in our country is to not use fossil fuels. So there is an inflation logic here, but it's kind of in the wonk weeds, not in the, you know, what everybody knows thing. But yeah, that's one of my favorite fun facts.
This was a very clear and helpful explanation. I think we need to get you a spot on national television to educate millions of people at the same time. You know, because it's concise, it's clear, and it explains a lot of different things. And, you know, in a sea of ignorance, this would be a very helpful.
I appreciate that. I think one of the things for you all to know about is there are a number of nonprofit groups who are gearing up to do more public education around the Inflation Reduction Act. There's been a little bit of that work in Madison. Some folks were going door to door telling people in certain neighborhoods about the IRA. Yeah, and certainly our office, like every time a library or community group says, hey, will you come talk about this? We say yes. Because this is how we do that. You know, if each of you say to one friend, hey, there's some like good stuff there. I got this information. You should check this out. Like you're the most trusted messenger to the people in your community, you know. So that's part of how we have to do this is rippling out.
I still say 60 minutes on 60 minutes.
But it's not a controversy. It's hard for the media to care because it's not drama.
And I think that the point about whether this gets repealed, the experience with the Affordable Care Act is that once people saw the benefits of it, you know, there's a bogeyman for a few years, but then once people saw, hey, it's actually benefiting me and my community, then it was much harder to repeal, and the repeal failed. And so I think that will happen if we give it a chance to work its way for a few years.
I think we need to let. Thank you all
Thank
for
you.
staying.
Thanks for sticking around.
Thank you.